Well, it's been hot and heavy on the podcast lately, Luke.
Heavy on the heavy. It's almost beach season, baby.
Speaking of heavy.
Right? You know what they say, if you can't tone it, tan it. Which means I'm going to be trying to do a bunch of tanning.
There you go. Think the Giants migrated to the beach, or they just stayed inland and built mounds?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I mean, you can wade pretty far out if you're 15 feet tall.
Right?
Yeah.
They were beach-loving beasts.
I wonder if the high center of gravity would have been tough, though. Maybe they weren't so agile in the sand. And the little people could trap them.
I just imagine the surf was pretty crowded that day.
Dude, think about a longboard if you're 15 feet tall.
A longboard. It's not a longboard.
Just shredding, bro.
But today we're going to bring on Derek from Megalithic Marvels. You know, I feel like last time when we talked with him with Judd, we were just getting into it.
We got to dive pretty deep, but I think this is going to be fun. It's going to be straight into the mind of Megalithic Marvels.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of giants, happy birthday, Andre the Giant. He would have been 75 today. The man who would single-handedly take down an entire barrel of beer.
Dang.
In one sitting.
Man.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Which is funny because before you came on, Derek, we were talking about if you think the Nephilim migrated to the beach like humans do. Like, all right, let's pack up and move south.
Let's go eat. Yeah, they're going to go eat some people, not some beach-dwelling people.
Because they're always on these tropical islands, right?
Well, I think we're going to find out. They like the islands, yes.
Look at that transition. So welcome to the show, Derek Olson again from Megalithic Marvels. We just scratched the surface with you when we talked Judd Burton and you on the double episode. And Luke and I were texting after that, like, man, we got to have him back on. That was so good. I felt like we were just getting into it. So our listeners are familiar with you. And if you guys don't follow Megalithic Marvels on Instagram, you're missing out on a ton of action. You're constantly posting content, great stuff. And we appreciate you coming on our show. And thanks so much for putting the word out last time when we did a show together. That was awesome of you. So
yeah, friend of the show now. Friend of the show, Derek Olson.
Yeah.
And I'm honored to be a friend of the show. Honored to be back, guys. It's always really enjoying the Blurry Creatures podcast. Lots of fun. Loving the Instagram account. Not only do you get some great information, but man, you laugh a lot watching that. So this is great.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Because it's a heavy topic, and we were talking about that before you came on. These topics are heavy. Like, you're talking about ancient history, and you're talking about corrupted bloodlines and the return of these demonic creatures, and here we are posting memes about it. I don't know. Like, sometimes there's some comedic relief that's necessary, right? But
absolutely.
Especially because the 80s are back, Nate. I mean, people are growing mullets unironically now. I mean, fanny packs have been back.
Yeah, I love how you're connecting it all to the 80s somehow, whether it's Back to the Future references or Legends of Zelda. I love all the 80s stuff.
Well, that's cool because you have one of the best Instagram accounts on the platform. So hearing that from you is great. And we were messaging a little bit about, well, Luke and I were laughing about, giants migrating to tropical areas. And then you talk about Easter Island and some of this ancient technology that's either gone missing or, yeah, that was the message. And then it kind of got us curious. So maybe we can launch into why you sent that message and what do you know that we don't know?
Yeah, let me start out with a question. So when I say the word Easter Island or the words, what's the first thing that you guys think of? What pops into your head?
Some Moai. It's those big old stone things, heads. which actually are bodies. If you do a little research,
Right? Yeah.
I think of that NES game Gradius.
you would.
Remember that one?
No.
You're flying the spaceship through, and there's those statues, and you shoot them. Remember? Gradius?
No. I remember TNC
All right,
Surf.
fine.
Remember that game?
TNC Surf.
That game was so
No.
hard. I used to just get angry. On
Oh,
NES.
you're the Bigfoot riding the skateboard.
Yeah, just angry though, because it's too hard. Anyway,
You're the isn't it a monkey riding a skateboard?
I don't know.
Dude, that's
Can't
right.
remember. All I remember is just I blacked out because of angst and anger
Blacked out
as a child.
No, I do think of this NES game where that was the first time I saw these like idle things that Luke was describing. You knew the actual term.
Yeah, go Luke, man. He said it right on the Moai. Yeah, and you guys both essentially said the same thing. You think of these giant monster statues on the island known as the Moai, right? And they're so iconic. I mean, they're ingrained really into the fabric of our modern pop culture. And therefore, most people I've found don't even realize the statues themselves point to so much more mystery and intrigue regarding this incredible ancient island civilization. So there's so much about this island. I think, man, we can devote a full show to it. How does it sound to you guys?
Oh yeah. And Luke's ready. I mean, Luke.
Dude, I've been waiting.
And here's
for
the
this.
carrot. After exhaustive research, I have uncovered possible evidence that suggests that giant blurry creatures were seen as recent as the 1700s roaming the shores of Easter Island.
I mean, think about a better place for those things to survive. That would be on an island, right? When they're being hunted, the idea is they were hunted, like here in North America by the Native Americans and regular sized folks to extinction. But if you're on an island, you got to get out there.
This episode hasn't come out yet, Derek, but we were just talking about it before we hit record. Laura was talking about Solomon Islands giants, and they're still there apparently. So Giants on Islands is the next T-shirt we're going to print for Blurry Creatures.
Yeah.
I'm staring at Luke on an island right now in a spec.
Aloha. Yeah.
This is serious. I'm having so much fun right now because sometimes our topics it just feels like it takes a while to warm up, but we're already laughing and making jokes. So yeah, tell us about Giants on Islands.
Yeah. So I think maybe, to keep listeners on the hook, we'll save the best part maybe for a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll first talk about the island and all of its megalithic mysteries. Because like I said, there's so much. And I've done some pretty exhaustive research. I've written a kind of an investigative 3-part series on Easter Island. And so the island, if you look at Google Maps, you're going to see it's pretty small. It's like 7 miles by 5 miles by 10 miles in size, but it's like the most remote inhabited island in the world. So it's like 2,000 plus miles from the coast of Chile. What's crazy is the first Europeans ever recorded to have visited Easter Island. It was a Dutch guy named Jacob Roggeveen, and he arrived to the island in 1722. And he was originally on his way to find the fabled land. It was called Terra Australis. They thought that this place existed. And so he was on his way to look for this fabled land. Instead, he bumps into Easter Island. And it happened to be Easter Sunday, April 5th, 1722. And that's why he called it Easter Island.
Mm.
And most people have heard, it has a Polynesian name as well, Rapa Nui, which I think translates to Great Rapa. And something interesting about the word Rapa, there's another island directly west of Easter Island, and it's called Rapa Iti. And there's some crazy oral traditions that have survived claiming that Rapa Iti, the island west of Easter Island, had been settled by pregnant women escaping wars and massacres on Easter Island. So kind of something interesting there to keep in your back pocket.
How do you do your research? Do you just
Wow.
How do you dig? I mean, how do you find this stuff? That's a question I had.
Oh man, I start by I just collect sources, and then I'm kind of looking at their sources, and then I'm kind of cross-checking. So a lot of my research is based for this Easter Island off of the work of explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who's, one of the great explorers. He was living, he went to Easter Island in the 50s and did kind of the first major excavations. And so I like his writings because he was kind of an out-of-the-box thinker. And again, he conducted some of the first excavations there. But he wrote stuff before everything was really politicized and politically correct. And so I'm basing a lot of this off of his findings, his book, and then cross-checking a lot of his references. And so that's kind of, I guess, the short answer.
Do you feel like a lot of that material, like, for instance, like newspapers used to write about digging up skeletons, and some of these, we found a couple of these books that talk about this stuff too, that there was a time from like late 1700s to the early 1900s where you could still print your thoughts about these things, and now all of a sudden you can't? Is that a theme when you're doing your research?
Absolutely. People who actually print their thoughts today are, considered alternative researchers, right? I guess I would fall into that category. And a lot of people you've had on your show, they'd be considered alternative because they don't fit into the mainstream narrative. And so, yeah, again, that's why I like a lot of my sources for this. I'm going to actually hit on sources that go way back to the 1700s, some of these first explorers that were on the island. And so I feel like we're getting a way clearer, obviously, picture from them than people that just go and visit today and filter it all through a paradigm.
Yeah, I love that. One of my thoughts, that one of the only things I really remember seeing is the pictures of them getting those statues getting dug up, and you can see, like, you only see the top of their head, and they go, looks like they go like 20, 30 feet down into the dirt, and my initial thought was just like, how could they get buried that deep? Unless there was a massive flood.
Right. No, you're right on. I mean, they're buried in up to, I think some 30 feet deep. And Thor Heyerdahl, the guy I'm referencing, he was the one that kind of first excavated these and discovered that they had bodies, because most of the world thought they were just heads for the longest time. And so that's a great question. Were they buried intentionally? A lot of modern day scholars say yes, that, or they were just buried due to thousands of years of soil buildup, or were they buried by a very sudden cataclysm? And I think there's some other stuff we're going to uncover that corroborates that.
I mean, that's the big mystery, is who they are,
right?
Who these people are and what they represent.
So it's crazy. So Roggeveen in 1722, he and his crew show up, and they report seeing about 3,000 what they call natives back then. They were covered in tattoos, body paint, feathers, and remember this, they had ears so long that they hung down to their shoulders. And they were performing strange ritual type worship around fires in front of these giant statues, which just blew the minds of these Dutch explorers. So that's kind of our first snapshot of seeing, real people on the island right there. And then another crazy thing to point out about Easter Island out of the gate here is that there's evidence to suggest that it was once an ancient tropical forest. And there's professors like, there's a guy named Dr. Olof Selling from the Swedish Museum of Natural History. This guy examined the stratified deposits from the crater swamps there on the island under a microscope, and he was able to determine that the island had basically once been covered by forest flora and trees that later became extinct. And a lot of the oral traditions back this up. There's talk of the island as once just this lush jungle. So that also lends to what happened to this ancient island oasis, and does this connect with why the Moai might be buried? Okay, so here's where it gets crazy. Let's talk about the strange genetic features of some of the island inhabitants. So many early explorers of the island, like Roggeveen, and Captain Cook, they reported about, the unusual shaped skulls, and not only skulls, but large bumps found on the back of the necks of island inhabitants. And you can do a Google search of this, but there's a number of really old, highly detailed carvings made of wood that have been found around the world in museums now, and they depict these strange features. And these carvings are said to represent the ancient ancestors that existed before these inhabitants, right? So they've got strange skulls. They've got weird bumps on the back of their necks that bulge out. And so you got to ask, right? Why did these ancient ancestors look so strange, so odd? So that's something to remember. Did you guys know that there's a lost language that was found on Easter Island?
How do you find a lost language? Just like carvings and...
Yeah, they're called the Rongo tablets. And there was, hundreds of years ago, there was missionaries that moved to the island, right, to save the island inhabitants. One guy's name was Eugene Irod. He lived there in the 1860s, and he was the first to discover that Easter Islanders, or you could say the Rapa Nuians, once had their own inscribed script called Rongo that was like indigenous to themselves. And these glyphs include pictographic and geometric shapes, but despite like crazy numerous attempts, nobody can really decipher them. So that's what I mean by lost. We've found them, but nobody can quite read them. But it's pretty crazy. It just adds to the intrigue and mystery of the island that there is this lost language.
Something that we've talked about on several episodes is how the giants slowly breeded out. And I think Roger in particularly was talking about how some of these Nephilim were 50% DNA in the beginning. There was a 50-50. And I never really thought about it that way, that over time it could get down to maybe just 3 or 4%, 5%. And is that angelic blood we're talking about, right? So they don't look exactly like the ancient giants or the first golden age giants, but they still have those character traits. Is that kind of what you're describing? Just little remnants of this ancient hybrid race?
I think that could be the case, especially as we get deeper into the island inhabitants, because we're going to find out that there was at least 2 classes of inhabitants on the island. And so, yeah, I think the wooden engravings and pictures of what was supposed to be these early island inhabitants could be generations removed from, the golden civilization elite, as Alberino would say, right?
So are we talking about like the connection to the elongated skulls, the Paracas stuff that we talk about with Tim and Brian Forster? And when you talk about anomalies, are you able to draw a line, similarities potentially between those two things?
Yeah, so there's huge similarities. We're going to find out between Easter Island and Peru, and I would even say between the elongated skull peoples who had, red hair. A lot of the Moai have these, they're called top knots, and it's representation of how you would tie your long red hair up in a knot on top of your head.
Like an original man bun.
There you go.
Yeah.
I could go on the new t-shirt as well.
Nate, now you got to grow one.
Luke will never miss a hair reference, ever.
You can't miss them. Can't ever.
What about a red beard? Did they have red beards? We all want to know. What do you think?
Dude, Nate definitely has the red hair going, so I want to see if there's a connection there with him.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying. His fascination with little people, too. There's something weird going on here, Derek.
Okay, so check this out. So in 1886, there was an explorer named William Thompson, shows up on the island, and I was telling you about these Rongo tablets. This guy succeeded in finding 2 of these hidden tablets, and he purposed to save whatever memory the island elders still had of the tablets and the origin. So the island elders couldn't necessarily read them, but they could remember the oral traditions related to some of these symbols. And so the oral traditions we learn from that assert that there was a guy named Hota Matawa who was the first king, and he possessed the knowledge of this written language. And Hota Matawa had apparently been a very powerful king in a land ravaged by wars. And so this guy flees where he was, embarks with a couple hundred followers on ships, and they come to Easter Island. And as soon as they arrive, his wife apparently has a child, and they give him some name which means the navel of the world. Okay, so remember that's important, because on the island, based on the Rapa Nui oral traditions, one of the most sacred parts of the island is this place called Te Pitu Kura, which means navel of light. Okay, so we got this connection with navel of the world, navel of light. And it's pretty crazy. I can send you guys pictures of this because most people don't know this exists on Easter Island. But it is this large stone sphere, perfectly circle in shape. And it's pretty big. And it's near one of the beaches. And according to legend, it was brought to the island by this king, Hota Matua, from his original homeland. And there's videos of people... this thing is high in iron content and it heats up apparently. It's got these magnetic properties and it causes compasses to spin, and you'll see pictures of people, trying to touch it and receive healing energy. And anyway, it's really weird, right? So it kind of seems to corroborate the legends of this King Hota Matua, that this stone sphere is here there. But it gets crazy. So Hota Matua shows up, but the oral traditions say that when he showed up, what does he find on the island? He finds a graveyard of tombs, and finds out that this island had once been inhabited long before he arrived. And that brings us to what I call the long-eared master builders. So remember I said that when Jacob Roggeveen saw these inhabitants on the island in the 1700s, they had long ears down to their shoulders, right? Well, it seems that they were emulating the long-eared master builders. And Thor Heyerdahl, the great explorer who showed up there in the 50s to Easter Island, did a lot of research on this. And so I'm pulling from some of that. So the oral traditions of the islanders state that the island was settled twice. The first time by a race known as the Long-Ears, and they are said to have come from the east. What is to the east of, Easter Island? It's Chile, it's Peru, it's that area, right? The second time, the island was settled by the Short-Ears from the west, and I'm thinking these were probably the Polynesians who arrived from Tahiti around 1,000 years ago. And so that would be Hota Matawa. We don't know for sure if there was an overlap between the two cultures, but there's a lot of information on the Long-Ears, who they appear to have been a power in the land in an early period, ancient period in history. And the oral traditions kind of hint that the Short-Ears were more laborers, while the Long-Ears were the master builders of the larger statues. We'll talk about how there's kind of two different statues. There's what seems to be much giant older statues, and then more recent smaller ones. And so the more giant statues, as well as the megalithic walls and the Ahu platforms, seem to have been created and crafted by the Long-Ears. And so pretty crazy stuff. So does King Hota Matawa come from the west and represent the later period short-eared inhabitants? And were the Long-Ears of the east associated with the master builders of Peru and Bolivia? I think so, because when you look at what the Spanish chroniclers recorded in their stories about the legendary Sun King, they called him Kon-Tiki. And to the Inca, he was known as Viracocha. And he and his followers, they were credited with bringing civilization to Peru and in the areas of Bolivia. And they were said to have had white skin, long ears, beards, like Nate, and said to have built megalithic structures.
Oh, long ears, Luke. Luke's got a joke in his mind right now. I can see it in his eyes.
I'm letting this one pass.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't my tribe. We weren't known for the long ears. You know what I mean? But I will say this is like one of the questions people have is like, how are these tribes of giants? I mean, do they start in the Holy Lands and then just build boats and go all over the place? Like, how are they ended up on these islands? The island in Southern California that's escaping my mind right now. Catalina. It was like one of the last strongholds of the giants because they were digging up those bones within like the last couple hundred years. So are they retreating to these areas and just getting away from humans? Are they building boats? Are they all over the world? There's so many questions.
Yeah, no, great questions. I think there was a great dispersion. So, you've got Israel bringing the hammer down in the Canaan area, and so you see this dispersion of these Nephilim hybrids fleeing out of the area, and because literally, whether it was Moses, Joshua, David, Israel, the mandate was wipe this spawn out, right? Because they weren't fully human. And so I theorize that they were fleeing to literally the four corners of the earth. They were advanced sailors. And so I think that's why we see, like in Sardinia, if you look at a map, that was probably a pretty straight shot, quicker place for them to flee from Canaan. And that was literally an island of giants. I mean, you've got these Naragi towers that surround the island. You've got the tombs of the giants all over, literally littered on that island. And you've got people still living there today that claim to have dug up giant skeleton bones that have since been confiscated. And then, whether it's Catalina Island, where there's literally been elongated skulls unearthed there, like we see in Peru, or here to Easter Island, I think these hybrids were literally fleeing for their lives, and then using the islands as a defensive place, where they've got the high ground and they've got that advantage. And so that brings us to something crazy in my research that I uncovered about Easter Island that's going to get us to the blurry creatures I referenced earlier. So let's talk about the white skin cannibalistic priesthood. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Sounds right up our alley. Let's go.
Is that how you lead into a dinner party, Derek? Like, let's talk about
the white-skinned cannibalistic priesthood. No, seriously, this is for real. So in the 1700s,
love it.
Again, we go back to the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, and he was exploring with a guy named Carl Frederick Behrens. They both, wrote diaries about their expeditions to the island. So these guys recorded, and again, I think this carries some weight because these are the first explorers from Europe. This is 1700s. And they recorded their observations of how when they came to the island, they saw these giant megalithic Moai statues, right? But then they observed that the statues were served by a priesthood, they called it, of, quote, very large, end quote, looking men who had remarkably white skin, long ears, and red hair. And they found it so interesting that while the rest of the population appeared to be of a mixed descent, they did not venerate the statues as the priests did. So pretty crazy, right? And then there's a guy named Father Gaspard Zumbaum, another kind of missionary guy who lived there in the 1800s. And he wrote about the island, and he had diaries, and he wrote that in former times, these high priests ate children in the name of their god Make. So he corroborates what Roggeveen wrote about 100 years later. And then excavations on the landward side of the Ahu Nana site have revealed charred human bones from cannibalistic rituals. So there was definitely cannibalism happening on this island. And so my question is, dude, who were these large, long-eared, white-skinned, red-haired, cannibalistic priests? Cannibalistic priests. Cannibalistic priests. Cannibalistic priests.
I think that everything you're describing from the historical record falls right in line with the things we know about the behavior of the giants, from bloodlust to cannibalism to, human sacrifice and really what sounds like an occult type worship. That has all the earmarks, pun intended, of the giants.
I mean, honestly, this is the first time I've heard about giant ears. We've heard about giant everything else, but I haven't heard anything about giant ears yet. I mean, it sounds like a vegan sandwich shop in Brooklyn.
Or like maybe you'll see some down at the Whole Foods.
But I have not heard the giants have giant ears. I mean, is it stretching, you think, or is it just they are giant ears?
No, I think it's
Sorry, I don't mean to be
I think it's long ears.
That's what I keep
long
thinking.
ears. I think the later peoples were emulating these the earliest inhabitants, the founders, the long ears, who may have stretched their ears, but certainly the later peoples, I think, were emulating these. But the key is, man, the reports of large stature, red hair, white skin. Again, that doesn't jive with Easter Island was inhabited by Polynesians, right?
Derek, I want to ask something. I have some thoughts because it's so remote. And I know that one of the things that Thor did was he proved that you could take a raft, that you could actually get there, navigating as the Polynesians were. But how did they get there, though? I mean, like initially, are we just saying that like that it was an accidental thing, or because that's a lot of things you talk about in Megalithic Marvels, I think, is fascinating that we have. There's all this advanced technology from the Megalithic period. And you don't cover anything where there's I mean, it's all going to be hypothesis, obviously, but that they knew where they were going. Like, I mean, they knew that this place was out there, that it wasn't necessarily accidental. And then I want to go back to that big orb. When you research the orb, is that naturally occurring? Or is that something that they was created with some sort of unknown technology, like we like to talk about with Megalithic Marvels? Two questions.
Yeah. I think the sphere was. I think it's I think it was crafted because it's like some of these orbs or spheres you see in Costa Rica. I mean, just perfectly circular and round. But I think it's a stone that has magnetic properties, and so that mixed with whatever ancient knowledge they had, it's highly thought of on the island to this day and considered very sacred. Again, you see all these people touching it and trying to receive from it, so it's kind of like, what's going on here? As to your question about getting to the island. Yeah, I think they were skilled sailors. And so, like Thor Heyerdahl proved, you can travel the world if you know what you're doing, one of these small reed type boats. But I think they were also had a great understanding of the stars, navigation. It would probably blow our minds what they knew, back in the day. There's also thought that, due to the flood, Easter Island was much bigger, right, and connected to other landmass before the flood. And so that could be another way people just kind of ran to the highest point as the waters encroached, maybe. I don't know.
Those are good theories. No, you wonder about things that remote. Like I remember like doing the studies about how the Polynesians found Hawaii, right? it was possible. They navigate by the stars. Hawaii is a long way from Polynesia, and but it's totally. But man, Easter Island's so remote. It's so out there, and it seems to be by itself, right? I mean, it's like it's kind of wild in that sense too.
I had a thought. This might be totally random, but someone told me, explain to me once what the phrase "as a crow flies" means. I don't know if you guys know this, but they used to take crows on boats, and if you throw a crow out, it'll fly towards land, no matter where you are. So they would follow the bird as a crow flies. So if they're navigating, they don't know where they are, they don't know where land is, they could throw a bird out, and it would fly to land, no matter what the weather was. So is there some sort of, how does the bird know that?
Dude, if it was or giants with a thunderbird too, man, you could really cover some ground, Nate.
As the thunderbird flies.
Yeah, exactly. They have some sort of supernatural knowledge, and you see this with animals all the time. They have these instincts that defy human abilities. I just think the giants originally were playing marbles on the island and left them. You know what I mean? Just the big guys, and we find those big old spheres, and they were just playing. They were bowling or something, Luke. And we find the bowling balls because they played games and hung out, probably, right?
Well, maybe it was a shot put. Maybe they were training for the early Giant Olympics.
They have this supernatural knowledge. They have this. Maybe they knew where the islands were. Maybe they just had a sixth sense or something. Supernatural knowledge of how to navigate and how to move. Because they built these. Some people have laid out on our some of our channels that these islands connect. They're the things that they're building. You can draw a straight line from one temple through another one, all the way across the world. It's almost like they're going to specific places. And Laura talked about the ley lines, the spiritual grid, that they travel. These supernatural entities travel in certain ways, like a supernatural freeway.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. There's a lot of research on the ancient, whether you call it ley lines or grid lines, in the antediluvian world. And so maybe that's why they were there on what we call an island now. Maybe they went there way before it was just an island, because it was, in some magnetically charged place that aligned with the constellations. But getting back to the megaliths, this is where it gets crazy, because I remember I was mind blown when I found out that, on Easter Island are megalithic mortalist walls, just like you'd see in Peru at Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu. And a lot of people, we've documented it now a lot on Megalithic Marvels, and others have. So I think word's getting out now. Others like, Brian Forster, and they've done some great research on these megalithic walls on Easter Island. So word's getting out. But Captain Cook, the great explorer, he and his British expedition, they showed up to the island in the late 1700s. And he marveled at the precision stone megalithic masonry on the island. And he wrote about how he was particularly impressed by this. I guess there was a huge megalithic wall at the Hangaroa area, which sadly no longer exists, as apparently it started to fall apart, and then they used it to build a new harbor. And so you hear stories like that all over the island. Many of the oldest structures that once existed along the cliffs that Captain Cook and other explorers described seeing, they've all disappeared into the sea from pounding ocean surf, landslides, earthquakes, and then just people grabbing them finally and building other stuff. So there's basically one wall left on Easter Island at Ahu Vinapu, which is this amazing megalithic wall. We've got pictures of it on Megalithic Marvels Instagram. We just actually did a video of it too. It's on YouTube. It's just real short, but you can see this wall up close. There's one section of it that is just, it's not just big blocks, but then there's this tiny strip in the middle, which just shows you it's like a slap in the face that there was some kind of advanced technology to just slip in this circular piece in the middle. Geologist Robert Schock, he talks about Easter Island a bit. He's been there several times. He believes that some of the construction, like this wall, could be as old as 12,000 years. and maybe some of these older Moai that I can talk about more in a few minutes. So, and then when you look at the Andean traditions again in Peru, they describe, that the megalithic monument builders were a race of these tall, white-skinned, bearded type giants. The leader was called Viracocha. So we've got the megaliths on Easter Island. Did you guys know that there was megalithic walls on Easter Island?
I did not.
Well, so Derek, we've got megalithic walls. We've got these precision tooled and created megaliths, and then we still haven't gotten to the Moai.
Okay, so yeah, the Moai. There's so much to talk about regarding the Moai. Do you guys have any guess on how many of these exist on the island? Ballpark?
You want to guess, Nate?
I'm going to guess 70 because there were 70 sons of God ruling over the nations.
I'm going to guess like 200.
Okay, Luke's the closest. There's approximately 950.
Oh my gosh.
Really?
Yeah, some of them are still, half buried. Some of them are really in horrible shape. But if you count them all, there's just about 950 or so statues. And some of the big ones are upwards of 33 feet tall. So that's huge when you see a picture of someone standing next to one of the big, which I think are the original ones. These are massive. Okay, so many of the statues, the biggest one, you can still see it in the quarry. So these statues were quarried right there in Easter Island. And we know this because there's still some that never left the quarry. They're like half carved. And the one that's still there is just massive. It's like 100 feet in length and would weigh about 100 tons if it was standing. So these things are huge. Many of them, though, were transported and then erected out of the quarry and put on these megalithic platforms called ahu, which basically is a Polynesian word for temple, I believe. So, and the fact that they were transported, as heavy and giant as they are, is really one of the greatest megalithic achievements of prehistory in the Pacific world, they say. So you've got these statues being carved in the quarry. And, there's theories about how this was done.
Derek, don't want to interrupt you, but this sounds so much like when we talk about the unfinished obelisk in Egypt, right? You have the biggest one is still half done.
Exactly. Yeah, the biggest one is still there, right? It never made it out for some reason, and maybe it was because it, had a crack in it. But people theorize that, maybe they got these out because what they would do is the front of the stone, statue was carved first. And then when the front and both sides had been exposed and finished, then the sculptors would start undercutting the back, which was still attached to the bedrock. And again, people theorize that they would do this using axes into the hard basalt, which, man, that seems like a lot of work. And then some theorize that when the statue is finished, they would break it off its keel, and then they would basically slide it down the slope using ropes, basically somehow tied to giant palm trunks. I've heard people say that palm trees are very soft, and so that seems iffy that kind of soft palm trees could move these huge multi-ton megaliths with ropes. Wow. But either way, we know they came out of the core. The greater mystery is the technical problem of how did they get the stone giants from the quarries all the way to the distant ahu platforms? And this is kind of a cool oral tradition, again, based off the Rongo tablets, that the Moai were moved with the use of what they call mana. And it's this kind of, I guess, some psychic force where matter yields to the focused intent of a person skilled in this art, and that they were basically moved by vibration or by words of the mouth and commanded to walk through the air. That's kind of the oral tradition. So you've got that. And then many people believe, researchers, that the islanders actually did this by walking them into place. And you might have seen videos on YouTube where people are kind of trying to reconstruct this by taking a moai, which I think is like a model, and tying ropes around its head. And then you got two teams of people and they're like wobbling it back and forth on each side. But the fact is, if you do that, it's going to cause all kinds of friction and deterioration on the bottom of these statues, right? But if you look at them, I think I mentioned this guy, this French explorer that was on the island in the 1860s, Rassal. He examined all the surfaces of the statues that were found abandoned in transit, like they were on their way somewhere and they didn't get there. All of them had perfectly polished bottoms and they were undamaged by friction.
Have we found any of these underwater anywhere?
Yes, there are some underwater. There are some photographs of some that you can see underwater. Yeah, that look like they might have fallen off the beach cliff due to erosion or earthquake. So that's one of the crazy mysteries, is how did they get from the quarry to the stands? If they were walked, they have great, they're polished on the bottom. So the coolest part though about the moai is, again, how Thor Heyerdahl in the 50s revealed these things aren't just heads, they've got bodies. So again, I think we asked this question earlier. Were they buried intentionally? Were they buried due to thousands of years of soil buildup, or due to a sudden flood,
cataclysm,
or worldwide cataclysm? Yeah.
Where do you fall on that? So you're the expert at this point, Derek. Where do you fall with that?
I think I lean towards that they were buried in probably a cataclysm, worldwide flood that probably caused the subsequent rise in sea levels, and that kind of changed the whole island structure, and that might be why the long years disappeared. And it's basically like this ancient island civilization was buried, and thousands of years later, who knows how many thousands of years, the short years arrive and kind of re-inhabit the island.
How long do you think the Golden Age was?
Wow, that's a great question. We need to get Alberino on here to answer that one.
Tim would give you a very serious answer.
Well, that's a question I've wondered a lot on our show, is how long was this going on? And I was thinking about this in many terms, philosophically, like the patience of God, for one, that these civilizations are, building all over the world. And certainly they're not loyal to him, and they are around long enough to build these structures. It's not like one day you wake up and these guys do some bad stuff and we're going to wipe them out. A long time goes by, because and the stones are the evidence, right? Just the pyramids took 20 years at least. So these hybrids are around a long time, it seems like, before God's finally like, all right, let's try this again.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was listening to an interview with Robert Schoch. Again, this guy's he doesn't see things from a biblical worldview, but this is a decorated scientist, geologist that's really broke with the mainstream based on his research. And he was saying, most archaeologists place civilization at like 4,000 to 3,000 BC, which that'd be 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. But he believes that an earlier cycle of civilization existed about 12,000 years ago, based on his work, regarding the Sphinx and the weathering around it. And now what we're learning about Göbekli Tepe, which is just this ancient site in Turkey. And so, yeah, I think the Golden Age, like Alberino says, I've been reading his book and I just love his chapters on that the Golden Age represented the dawn of humanity, and the secular side romanticizes it as the gods walking among man, right? But the Hebrew worldview was a very dark time on planet Earth, because the reality is that these Golden Age hybrids, these ruling elites, were massacring humanity, and until we see what was happening with the conquest of Canaan. Then they were finally on their run. But we could dedicate a whole show to the origins of the Golden Age, couldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it was defiling, it was debauchery, it was desecration. I mean, anything in the research talk about who these Moai were, they look very similar. All of them look like the same replication of somebody or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Moai, at least the older giant ones that are found in the Rano, Raraku, I think it is, quarry, those could have been made by the long ears themselves. And then the smaller ones with the top knots on their heads, the red cylinders that you find around the coast, I believe those are most likely created by the short ear, maybe the Polynesians that came later. But again, they were all to deify and remember these long-eared inhabitants, which very well could have been Nephilim type hybrids. So I think that's who these Moai are supposed to be representing. Because when you take into account all their strange features, the Moai have got these weird elongated shaped heads. They've got angular faces, kind of long phallus shaped bodies, protruding foreheads. And then have you guys seen a picture of their fingers?
No.
Yeah, I can send you some pictures, but most of the Moai, they have arms, and their arms are kind of pointed down towards where. and they've got these long reptilian looking fingers. So again, very non-human. So the big question is, who were they? And again, you look at the oral traditions of the island, and you even read the work from, really decorated explorers, scientists. There's a woman named Van Tildenberg, a PhD. She runs the Easter Island Statue Project, and she says this. She says the megalithic statues known as the Moai are universally regarded on Rapa Nui today as representations of chiefly deified ancestors. They are the living faces of the past. They are the living faces of the past. They are the living faces of the past. They are the living faces of So that brings us to the reports of blurry creatures roaming the island.
Yeah.
Are you guys ready for this?
Yeah.
I love it.
Roll that time cop.
That's Luke's new favorite line.
I like to give Nate that because that's our little theme song that we have, and then Nate didn't do it for an episode, and people got very angry that we didn't play time cop.
Is that the
outro song?
Yeah, I love that tune. I've never known where that came from, but I like it.
Yeah. We he gave us permission to use it, so good guy, good dude. I think it's a French DJ.
Oh, cool.
So we got to hear about these blurry creatures, man.
Yeah, give us the creatures.
I wanted to make one point too that I think is interesting, that when there's a lot of cultures that, and this is something I just thought about, that have ancestor worship. And we talked to Derek Gilbert on the show a couple episodes back. He was talking about how, after the giants died, there were these cults of the dead giants where they worship they worship these dead giants, these deified ancestors, right? And really, this at the core, then you're talking about these people essentially worshiping the Watchers and the offspring of the Watchers, which is what ancestor worship ends up adding up to, which I think is fascinating, because then it fits right back into Deuteronomy 32 and divine council and the nations being divided and these little g gods ruling over these places, and then them creating these cults of worship unto themselves, which was again the defilement of creation, the flood, and everything that followed with God's judgment on that. But it's very interesting that it connects the dot, and it's a circle, as I like to point out. And I can't remember what movie that's from. It's Rob Schneider. It's a circle.
It really is a circle, Luke, and I think what you just stated is exactly what we see happening on this strange island. And so the crazy thing is, there's there's reports of living giants on Easter Island. So 18th century European explorers described, in some of their writings that they saw these living giants, men and women that were very large. So I want to read for you, some of these accounts. Or one of these accounts. There were several I found. So there's a guy named Alexander Dalrymple, weird name. He lived from, in the...
They're testing you, man.
Man, your tongue's getting a workout on these pronunciation.
Yeah. I'm just tipping my cap to you, man.
That's good.
Hey, I want people to know I've done my research because I know this stuff sounds crazy, right? So I want people to be able to Google this, look it up themselves, so that they see there is some teeth to this. It's not just something crazy I read on Google, right?
You could be making it up.
On Wikipedia.
Frumpus McDougal Hound.
Yeah.
It's like, if you sailed to an island back in the day, you had to have a strange name first. It's like, it was a prerequisite.
You really had to. You weren't allowed otherwise.
Roggeveen.
Right? They wouldn't let you in the Explorer Club. They're like, Tom, Dick, Harry, you guys are out. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So there's this guy named Dalrymple. And so he lives in the late 1700s. He was a Scottish geographer. And he was the first hydrographer of the British Admiralty. So kind of an important guy. He produced thousands of nautical charts, mapping a remarkable number of seas and oceans for the first time, and really contributed to the safety of shipping back in the 1700s, early 1800s. So pretty cool guy, right? Mm. So while he was translating some Spanish documents he found in the Philippines in 1762, he found Luis Vaz de Torres' testimony proving passage south of New Guinea, known as the Torres Strait. So he finds this discovery, and this leads him to, I should put together a book, a publication, a historical collection of all the voyages of these great explorers, kind of his day. He did that. He wrote a book called Voyages and Discoveries in the South Pacific Ocean. And so in this book, Dalrymple documents the ship logs of Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, the guy who was the first European explorer to Easter Island in 1722. Again, I'm just looking for source material and information as I was investigating Easter Island, and I was shocked to find several mentions of large living giants that were seen ashore on Easter Island and the surrounding islands by Roggeveen and his crew. Mm. And so here's the account that was the most striking. And this is Roggeveen talking. It says, quote, "Thus far my narratives will gain credit because it contains nothing in common. Yet I must declare that all these savages are of a more than gigantic size. For the men being twice as tall and thick as large as the largest of our people, they measured one with another the height of 12 feet, so that we could easily, who will not wonder at it without stooping, have passed between the legs of these sons of Goliath."
Wow.
According to their height, so is their thickness, and are all now with one another very well proportioned, so that each could have passed for a Hercules. But none of their wives came up to the height of the men, being commonly not above 10 or 11 feet. So let me stop for a minute. So he's kind of saying, the men appeared to be 12 feet or plus, and the women, 10 feet plus. He continues, the men had their bodies painted with a red or dark brown, and the women with a scarlet color. I doubt not, but most people who read this voyage will give it no credit to what I now relate, and that this account of the height of these giants will probably pass with them for a mere fable or fiction, but this I declare that I have put down nothing but the real truth, and that this people, upon the nicest inspection, were in fact of such a surpassing height as I have here described. In the countries adjacent to and in the South Sea, giants have been found of a height far superior to us, end quote.
Wow.
Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah. Dude, the WNBA on Easter Island would have been off the chain.
No, it's interesting too, though, that he already makes a caveat too to like the idea that, hey, look, they're going to push back on this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he saw that coming. It wasn't like he was spinning some fantastical tale and just trying to sell books. Yeah,
like The Long Walk, and he just throws seeing that family of Yeti in the
Yeti family as we're walking through the Himalayas.
Yeah. But a lot of these guys, they have these moments where, and I think all of us have that, where if you want to speak the truth and you go against the mainstream narrative, you have that feeling of like, do I go along with what I know I saw, or do I just slip back into society and tell them what they want to hear? And that's a familiar thing on our show. That's
Sons of Goliath.
12 feet.
Sons of Goliath.
And that's hard on our show, Derek, because I mean, there's guys like who come on the show and have really well researched, and they debate if they even got over 10 feet.
Well, Heiser was one of those guys.
Yeah, Heiser's one of those.
Yeah, empirically talking about cubits in the Hebrew and what that would have meant as far as how tall people actually were.
And I make jokes about, little comic relief about them playing marbles, but I think they got that. Part of me feels like they were big at one point. I mean, big. Building these things. The golden age, 50-footers maybe.
Hey, I don't know about that.
Why not? What do you think?
I just know you love that. You love that and the little people. I'm
see
I'm
evidence
with Derek
for it
right here. I'm with Dutch Van Vonderbun, whatever his name is. Saying like, yeah, man, 10, 11, 12 feet. That's
what year?
A giant.
This is in 1700 though. I'm talking thousands and thousands of years prior to that. If they're 12 feet in the 1700s, bro.
We talk about megafauna. We talk about with Dr. Judd about megafauna and maybe they got big.
I mean, they're still 12-footers.
Yeah, I think the giants, the first generations there, that were spawned right after the Watchers' descent on Mount Hermon. I believe those were definitely the big ones, definitely bigger than 10 feet. Probably theorized that, yeah, they got smaller. But again, you look at the megaliths. The megaliths to me are in so many ways kind of the smoking gun to how powerful, these beings had to be when you look at the scale and weight of them.
Exactly.
And the precision. So, I believe they had advanced technology, but they also had to have size.
Just to move these things, right? I mean, even talk about last episode we talked about the black boxes in Egypt. Some of these things are just defy logic and defy even modern day construction moving abilities, which I think, to your point, behooves the idea that there had to be some big old people moving big things.
So you say there was almost 1,000 of these statues on the island, and they had to have been levitated to get there. I mean, the more we get into this show, the more we understand that there is invisible energy, ley lines, grids, sound resonance, vibrations. I don't know, there's probably no way to document this, but do you feel like sound and acoustics is a big part of how they built these things and moved these statues? I mean, are the local stories about levitation legit, you think?
I mean, I think there's something to it. When you do talk about acoustics and sound resonance, yeah, kind of like we hit on in our last show, when you look at the ultrasonic cutting and sound waves that probably produce the obelisks, when you really objectively look at how these were precision cut and how they, basically were like antennas producing cosmic rays that powered the city. And so I think, yeah, you'd find something similar if we're talking about a pre-flood world out here on Easter Island. And maybe that's where the oral traditions come from, with the locals saying, well, they walked into place. Maybe that's a way of saying there was a technology that they used to cut these things out of the quarry and move them all the way to these platforms. And another thing that might corroborate that is if you look close at the Moai, they're covered in strange designs, especially on their back. And so there's no way these things could have been drug, right, on the ground. And I would say even on poles and stuff, because there's pretty intricate designs you can see there. So I believe that plays a part in how they were moved and some of the technology that was used in the golden age, or we want to call the pre-flood, pre-cataclysm world.
One of the things that I think about a lot is just how debauched everything was, and why when you mix the angelic blood with the human blood do we get this debauchery. Like, if some of these entities come from heaven, why the evil? Why is the mixture so, why does it ultimately spit out a satanic formula? You know what I mean? It's hard to wrap your mind around it, because you see some of these ancient carvings, the things on their back, and to like a modern day human perspective, there's no reference to like when you're looking at it. But if you just try to imagine like what it was like back then, it was probably, like you were saying, sinister, dark, depraved. Just the golden age was not like a fun time. Even if there was this insane technology, it seems like you probably could feel the darkness. And what are they building? And why are they building it? And it's not just for decoration, right?
Right. Yeah, I like how I listened to you guys' show with Al Barino, and then, like I said, I've been reading his book, and he talks about, how the megalithic ruins we see around the world, especially like those in Peru, pyramids, they display this trademark technique of cyclopean masons. And these kind of megaliths have been discovered in all four hemispheres of the planet. And so the simplest explanation, he says, for the universality of the megalithic phenomenon is to assume that an advanced global civilization once, populated the earth until it was utterly destroyed in a worldwide cataclysm. And so the general narrative relating to the commingling of God and man, the subsequent procreation of hybrid offspring, and the sudden obliteration of our ruins in cataclysm, it's detected in every written record. And so there's all these parallels to that in the pre-flood legends of Mesopotamia, the Egyptians, the Mesoamericans, and the Polynesians. They speak of, this cataclysm, flood. But I like how Alberino says that if megaliths are the only representative of the knowledge and technology possessed by an elite, caste of beings, who ruled over like a Bronze Age civilization that was destroyed in the waters of a flood, then we should expect to find precisely the megalithic ruins we see today and nothing more. I thought that was a great point, being that he's saying it's not so much that it was this advanced golden age civilization, but an advanced fraternity within the civilization, the golden race, right? These hybrids who had the knowledge, had the power. That's why we don't see megalithic cities all over, but we see these spots where they ruled.
I think it's interesting too, and I just thought of this, and this could be way off, but like if you think about the supernatural, right, and that these beings were essentially half supernatural or angelic, and we think about what the supernatural manifests itself today, right? We talk about it with Dr. Greg Reed, Nate, about moving, how these things move beds and move physically, move things, and spiritually move things in the physical. And then I think about that and think like, it's not that far of a leap to think that similar things could have happened on a bigger scale, in a time when these hybrid beings were walking around, right? And then I also think about Tesla. I go, even in newer time, like Tesla was before everything went with Edison. Tesla was figuring out ways to pull energy out of thin air and make free energy, right? There's a lot of technologies that we just choose not to pursue or aren't using, or maybe are lost to this point. And to your point with the obelisks and the way that these things were created, there's so much things I don't think we can find context for, because we don't really. It's lost. It's like it's the Babylonian Library of Secret Knowledge. It's gone. It just isn't here, right? And So, I mean, I think it's perfectly possible that these oral traditions are not just stories, but they were able to utilize whatever it is we don't understand to move giant, huge statues. That, like you're right, that you're not going to roll on palm trees, and if you drag them, they're going to end up ruined. And somehow they're perfectly put and perfectly pristine years later. It's insanity, but I think it's. I also think it's not out of the realm to think, hey, we can see breadcrumbs of this today.
Well, people describe, Bigfoot, Luke, that like Bigfoot has some of this technology. We even still have these beings around, that's what I'm saying, that seem to have the mixture of bloods, because that's the best explanation I've heard on our show. And after listening to these podcasts for so long, that like, how does this animal do this stuff? Well, a lot of theories are it's got a mixture of bloods. And what we're talking about is humans and multiple angelic, demonic, human DNAs mixing. And when you have these other DNAs, it's like genetics switches turn off and on. And I wonder if over time, Derek, that just slowly over time, the genetic switches just start turning off. And so we start making crude construction because the switches are turning off and we're just not able to understand the technology. But when people think technology, they just think iPhones and computers.
And power saws and nailers.
Yeah.
And air compressors, stuff I got in my garage.
They're not thinking about like a bird that knows how to fly from a boat to an island in cloudy weather. That kind of technology, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We would barely recognize the technology that the elites had in the Golden Age, I believe. And we see this when you just, again, I've been to Peru. Every site you see the megalithic, which is precision crafted. And then you see, the poor man version that it appears the Inca tried to emulate. And you see this everywhere. You see it in Egypt, where you've got the dynastic Egyptians trying to build temples that looked like what you see at Abydos and around the pyramids, but it just doesn't compare, right? And so, they were doing everything they could to emulate it and keep it going. But like you're saying, we're just running out of ideas.
Yeah.
And does it frustrate you when you're in this space and you see that people see all these clues and they don't have one narrative of the story? Because to me, it feels like there's one narrative. We're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about one larger story that has a beginning and has an end. But some of these people just think that stuff's flying from other galaxies and just cruising in for 100 years, dropping off some folks and flying out. And it's just this hodgepodge of theories. That would drive me nuts if I was in your shoes and in this space, hearing all the wacky theories thrown at you.
Oh man, it's really funny. I guess I've developed a grace to I've had to, if I want to have fun doing this.
Yeah.
Because for a while, it does affect you when you constantly get the negative comments and the haters and the trolls. And so I've really had to just flip a switch. Unless something is just, over the top, I just try to ignore all that, because no matter what I post or, whenever I create a video or post a picture or reel on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you've always got the alien crowd, right? And their answer is always posting a big, emoji of an alien or GIF and saying, this is what's going on here. And then on the complete other side, again, I try to find common ground with people that, what can at least unite us on this level is we know there's something more going on than we've been told, right? Advanced technology. We can agree on that. But even when I do that, then I've got the other side who, I would say is the mainstream archaeology side, who wants to just hate on you for questioning the narrative and their answer is they're basically always saying, why do you think so less of humanity that they couldn't build this? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I'm always dealing with that crowd. So it feels like I'm often kind of caught in the middle. You've got, ancient aliens. I'm just trying to sit in this space of, okay, there's more going on. There was advanced technology. And then I use that, to point people to Genesis 6. And again, then you have this crowd of how can you even say that? So yeah, it's challenging, but I've got to tune it out to keep having fun, I guess.
I think it's interesting. There's a lot of smart people there too. You have the Hugh Newmans and the people that are very intelligent people that also subscribe to, the ancient alien narrative. And then for me, the human thing is like, it's the best encapsulation of academia and postmodern thought of today is that don't believe what your eyes see. And that's really what they're telling you, right? They're saying, don't believe what your eyes see. Believe this. This is what you're seeing. This is the story that you're supposed to believe. And you're like, well, I'm seeing really old stuff that's way better done than the new stuff. It doesn't make sense the way you're telling it. But when we come from a biblical worldview, I think it all makes sense because we understand there's a deception, and then there's constant deception. There's a war for our hearts to make us, to make us not believe the things that we know to be true. And I think you do a great job. I think you do a great job of walking the line there because it is a tough space. And there's a lot of smart people that just are deceived. And I think we talked about the top. The ancient alien thing to me is just, it's a way to pull God out of the equation. And it's really kind of wacky to want to really subscribe to that.
Well, anything's possible. And when you get, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is. It's then you get into this whole like, Oprah speak your truth. And that's really what it is. You're not anchored to anything. So all to say, I really love the way that you presented this, even this Easter Island thing. And I love what you do in Megalithic Marvels because you go to the sources, you go to these sources, you cross-reference them. So our listeners know all this stuff isn't just, we're not sitting up here telling stories. Derek has done a ton of research. He's looked at all the sources, gone back to the people that were there that had eyes on it for those reports. And then looked to back that up with validity from other sources. And it's fascinating when you actually spend the time to do that. And I think we live in a generation, people want to read the headlines and the tweet and the, whatever, 90 characters, whatever, and that's your conclusion. And the reality is that you got to put in the time.
No, I appreciate those kind words, Luke. And yeah, thanks for your guys' support with Megalithic Marvels. And it's fun to partner and come on your show. And man, you guys you're doing subscribers or members. It sounds like members only.
Look out.
Come on now, tell us more about
Team
that.
Blurry. Come on, Nate.
So for us in the member space, we try to release just extra content to support the show because we started out of the gate with doing a lot of work on the show, and to make it sustainable, I think we just need to build some way to justify the insane amount of time it takes to pull. I mean, you post content all the time. It's a ton of work.
It is a ton of work.
We're trying, we're trying to do some cool stuff too, I think, and just not to cut you off, but and I think we'd like to invite you at some point, just do interactive stuff for the members, provide extra content. We'd like to start doing these happy hour things where we do, these discussions with some of our guests, maybe for a half hour, where the members can sit in, and listen and even ask questions. So just provide an extra layer of interaction. And to Nate's point, I think at this point, 40 episodes in, we talked about this at the beginning too, I don't think people have any question of who we are or where we come from. So if you disagree with us completely, you probably still aren't listening. And I'm sure you get a lot of the same too. At some point, people come for they come for Bigfoot and they get a healthy dose of the Bible, and that either intrigues them and they keep going, or it turns them off and they write a 1-star review and they hate Nate forever.
Just me because I have red hair, right?
Just because you read all the reviews, pal.
I'm the whipping. I know. That's my problem.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Why do I do that?
It's your baby. It's your baby. It really is. So,
well, I mean, and I was going to say this earlier when we were ranting, is that I feel like Blurry Creatures to me is I was just desperate for better answers. And maybe that's why you started Megalithic Marvels too. You just want better answers. I want better answers. Bigfoot, you hear weird stories over and over again. Drives you insane. What the heck is this thing? How does it make sense in a greater, bigger story? I don't know if that's something you can relate to, but that's how I feel.
Absolutely. I like the way you said that. Yeah, I started Megalithic Marvels as a way to, I was doing all this research, this Easter Island subject is a prime example. I'm doing all this research because I'm into this stuff. But I found that there just wasn't a whole lot of quality places to go to and find a repository of it. There wasn't a lot of blogs out there. I started out as a blog, and there wasn't really any consistent blogs dedicated to kind of a biblical worldview on these subjects: the Nephilim, giants, megaliths. And so, I actually started with a blog, megalithicmarvels.com, and I posted this, Easter Island stuff, and I went to Lovelock Cave, and I did a lot of research on the red-haired giants there. So I was kind of taken back by the response, that there was a hunger for this stuff. And then I went to Peru, started an Instagram account just because I had all these pictures, and it just took off. So I really believe in this day we're living in, where everything is so fake in a lot of ways. Fake news, you can go on, right? People they're hungering for truth. Even if they don't have a biblical worldview, they're just searching for truth. They know there's more. They know they're being lied to. They know, the truth is being suppressed, and they're just searching. And so I think that's why they're finding your podcast and other great outlets like this to talk about this stuff. And back to the audience, again, being a person who has a biblical worldview, who is interested in these subjects of giants and megaliths, it can be a real lonely place because you're kind of caught in the middle of ancient aliens, mainstream archaeology. But then again, I've found most Christians, they believe in the craziest stuff, like the earth being spoken to existence and Jesus being born of a virgin and donkeys talking, but they can't connect the dots to the giants once existed and stuff like that, right? And so it can be this lonely space where even most believers won't buy into this stuff.
Yeah, the church doesn't address it either. David and Goliath are fine, but we never talk about where Goliath came from and why that is, right? I think you hit it dead square on the head.
Yeah, that was really good. We talked about this very subject with Gregory Reed, saying that when you get into it's a lonely place. When you start going down the rabbit holes of truth, you find yourself alone a lot, because either people are afraid of what's like he was saying, there was people putting hits on his life. You start getting close to the truth, you're not going to get a bunch of people clapping for you. You're going to get hate mail. You're going to get, trolls. You're going to get attacked. It's like the truth doesn't want to come out, but it's there. In your case, it's these big stone blocks that are just obviously
they're speaking.
Supernatural.
Yeah, they're speaking.
Yeah.
Now we talked about this the other day, just you and I offline, about to the degree that the programming and the propaganda has affected all of us. Like I think it becomes shockingly aware of how much even we've been deceived, and I feel like in some ways this whole thing is an awakening. It's being awake to the truth, right? And then you realize that just how much deception, and you shouldn't be, but at the same time, I'm not surprised by it, right? I'm surprised by the depths of it, but I'm not surprised that it exists. Like this whole battle for our souls is predicated on deception. So yeah, it becomes a lonely place when you're seeking the truth, and even lonelier when you start speaking it. Seeking's one thing, but speaking it out too is another thing, because like Nate said, you get a lot of pushback. People don't want their little bubbles burst. Even in the church, they don't want their bubbles burst. It's much more comfortable to talk about the things that seem comfortable, even though, like you said, it's radically uncomfortable to talk about virgin birth, donkeys talking, resurrection, the dead rising from their tombs, and yet we've been so conditioned to that, and the Christmas story and all those things that become so tradition that I think it loses its teeth, right? So we appreciate you coming on. Appreciate this. Appreciate Easter Island just dropping just nuggets and bombs of knowledge into our brains. But yeah,
you're always you're a friend of the show. You're always welcome here with us, and you've made us feel like there are friends. We can make friends in this space too. Because at first we launched out and just trying to connect and say like, are there other podcasts that are interested in what we're doing? And you quickly find out that like, especially in the Bigfoot space, you can't start talking about God. Maybe we do scratch that itch. That there is that Venn diagram of people who are believing in the biblical worldview, but also are fascinated by creature sightings too. So
yeah, but I mean, I think much like Derek, you started a blog, right? Like I don't think Nate and I started this whole thing to be like necessarily end up where it is now. Nate, I mean, it started out as a Bigfoot. We were just a couple dudes talking about Bigfoot, and here we are. Like we're down this crazy rabbit hole of theology, and but I mean, I love it. It's great.
No, that's what I love about your guys' show is you guys are real. You talk about Bigfoot, but yeah, you're going into so many other venues. Whether it's the giants and hybrids and megaliths and ancient history, and so I definitely think you're scratching an itch for, especially guys our age. Because I don't know about your audience, but my audience it's crazy. It's like 70% men that are between 35 and 45.
Yeah,
like off the charts. Guys are into this stuff. And so
you got to start selling beard oil.
Yeah, beard oil and homebrew.
Megalithic Marvels beard oil.
Maybe that should be for us. Maybe Nate. Maybe that's more our. I don't know. Not only are we selling it, we're also clients.
That's how you support your podcast, right? Like I started talking about these megaliths, but then I got into the beard oil business and it just boomed. No, I hear you though. That's kind of our demographic. Yeah. Although we have a lot of female supporters hopping on, and it was good.
Cool.
And this week's a female guest. She wrote a book about the Nephilim and the Fed being connected.
Wow!
Right.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and so I like it when the females get on. But yeah, it's definitely a dude space for sure.
You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up.
Yeah.
So let's definitely stay connected. And once the show goes live, send me a link and I'll create a video out of it and help promote your Instagram again.
You're a good man. We're gonna put Luke on the beach out there for everybody to see
with my floating UFO guitar.
People are gonna
that is a guitar-shaped UFO. That is weird.
We'll always support what you're doing. Reshare whatever you want. If you want us to make some. Whatever you need, let us know, and we'll always try to help you, man. We appreciate it.
Ditto that.
Feels bigger than just a bunch of people trying to promote themselves. We're trying to promote the truth, and that's you need other people when you're doing that.
That's right.
Tell the people where to find you, Derek.
Yeah, find us at megalithicmarvels.com. That's kind of the blog side of things, and then we're on Instagram. Just search for Megalithic Marvels, one word. And actually, you don't even have to have some people think you have to have an Instagram account to view that. You don't. You can pull it up on your desktop, instagram.com/Megalithic Marvels, and you can see all the videos and pictures there as well too. And then we're on Facebook. We got a Facebook page, YouTube channel. So lots of photos, lots of video, and blogs to read. So we're having fun.
Love it. Awesome. Guys, go out there and add them on Instagram at least. And I already have some great Mega Man 80s mashup ideas going in my mind right now. So wait for it. It's coming, baby. It's coming.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Thanks, Derek.
Till next time.
Yeah, buddy.
Bye.